Yo, what's up guys, it's ApTreX here. The era of Windows emulation on Android is finally here, which means that you can now play high-end PC games like GTA 5, Red Dead Redemption 2, Cyberpunk 2077 and much more on your mobile devices with the help of a Windows emulator. Well, in today's video, I'll be telling you guys the top 10 best Windows emulators for Android devices in 2024. I'll be ranking them according to their compatibility, performance, bug fixes, optimizations and overall how easy it is actually to set up and use. But before getting started, if you guys are new here, hit that like button, subscribe, turn on all notification as I upload similar videos on my channel. With that being said, let's jump right into the number 10 spot, which is going to be the Limbo PC emulator for Android. Limbo is a QEMU based PC emulator for Android devices which is capable of running operating systems like Windows 11, Windows 10, Windows 8 and lot more. It is technically a Windows PC emulator for Android devices, but unfortunately running games on it is super hard because it is very unoptimized. It is not even capable of booting high-end Windows 11 operating system files. For example, the original Windows 11, you need modified versions of the Windows 11 if you want to use it on the Limbo PC emulator. Well, I have already made a video talking about how to run Windows 11 on Android using the Limbo PC emulator, which you can watch on the iCard above. Nonetheless, this emulator isn't really capable of emulating high-end PC games on Android, and that's why it is on the number 10 spot of our today's video. Moving on the number 8 spot of our today's video, we have ExaGear, which is a very popular Windows emulator for Android, one of the first emulators which I myself tried in 2018 when it was officially available on Play Store. I played old classic games on it on a low-end Android device and it was very playable experience, and to be honest, to this day ExaGear emulator is still being continued. This emulator was officially discontinued by its previous developers, but now some other developers have taken up this project and still continuing the ExaGear emulator, but there are just too many options which are way better than ExaGear. That's why I have kept this emulator at the number 9 spot of our today's video, though ExaGear was one of the first emulators to be able to run GTA 4 on Android. With that being said, let's move on towards the number 8 spot of our today's video. On the number 8 spot, we have Box64 Droid. Once again, Box64 Droid was one of the newest Wine-based Windows emulator for Android devices, and it was pretty stable. It was also one of the first Windows emulator which managed to run games like GTA 5 on Android. Now, Box64 Droid is not really kept up to date for now, that's why I don't really cover it on my channels, but nonetheless Box64 Droid was an amazing emulator for its time. But after its release, there were a lot more Windows emulator for Android which are definitely better than Box64 Droid. Moving on the number 7 spot of our today's video, we have Termux-Box Emulator. Now, Termux-Box Emulator was one of the first Windows emulator for Android which I used to run GTA 5 on my Android device, and it wasn't really flawless. It is the true essence of Windows emulation on Android. People would expect it should lag like 10 to 15 FPS on flagship devices. That was what we were getting on this emulator, and to be completely honest guys, Termux-Box Emulator is pretty stable, but unfortunately it was discontinued by its developer because they started working on a newer version of this emulator with Vulkan driver support. That's why the performance improved. Along with that, it is a very popular emulator which I'll explain later on in our today's list, and it was also one of the first main Windows emulators for Android of 2023, which I was really excited about. And the other emulators which we'll take a look at in today's video are literally going to blow our mind, because on the number 6 spot of our today's video we have FX Emulator. Now, you might be wondering, why have I included an unstable or out of date Windows emulator for Android? Because this is the only Windows emulator for Android which is capable of emulating PS3 games on Android with very great FPS. Now, let me explain how it works. Windows emulators can run Windows apps as well as games on Android, which means that we can use it to run console emulators that are built for PC. For example, many YouTubers have tried to run RPCS3 PS3 emulator on Android with the help of FX Windows emulator and ran games like Just Cause and lot more, including Uncharted, all of them with playable gameplay results at least 10 to 15 FPS, that too on a mid-range Android device. So FX Emulator is the only single Windows emulator for Android which is good in terms of PS3 emulation on Android. It is very stable but not that capable compared to other emulators in our today's list. With that being said, let's move on towards the number 5 spot of our today's video, which is going to be Winlator CN. Now, Winlator CN is the Chinese version of Winlator Android which is more up to date than the normal global version of Winlator Android which we see in its official GitHub page. Basically what it means is that in Winlator CN you will get experimental features, but experimental doesn't always mean better, as it is an unstable version of Winlator. That's why it is ranked on the number 5 spot of our today's video, and it has some language issues as well. As I mentioned, it is in Chinese, so not everyone will be able to use this emulator. Nonetheless, it is one of the most stable Windows emulator for Android devices, compatible with any game that you can imagine. It can probably emulate it except for the latest titles, though it can even emulate games like Pal World and Red Dead Redemption, but unfortunately due to the language barrier I wouldn't rank it any above than number 5. With that being said, let's move on towards the number 4 spot of our today's video, which is going to be the Mobox Windows emulator for Android. Now if you know about Windows emulators, then you will be shocked, like why the heck did I rank this Windows emulator on number 4? It should probably be on the number 1 spot of our today's video, right? Well, no, Mobox Emulator hasn't been updated since a very long time, and I'm not really sure what the developer is aiming for, but Mobox Emulator is one of the best, most popular Windows emulator for Android devices that is easy to set up, easy to use, also very minimal, support for games like Red Dead Redemption 2 and much more. It even supports devices with Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, but unfortunately due to not having regular updates, not having the newer turnip drivers, not having the newest Wine versions, the D3D drivers and much more, I can't rank it above the number 4 spot for our today's list, because there are 3 Windows emulator that perform better than Mobox Windows emulator. On the number 3 spot of our today's video, we have Winlator Android. Now personally, if you ask me which emulator would I use, Mobox or Winlator, I would have to go with Winlator, because that emulator is just much more easier to set up than the Mobox emulator. You don't need to use Termux or Termux-X11. You can just use the standalone Winlator app and it will do everything by itself. You just need to create a container, and yeah, that's about it. It's very user friendly. It also supports games just like Mobox emulator, and it has a very great performance on even mid-range Snapdragon processor Android devices. Though unfortunately, just like the Mobox Windows emulator, Winlator hasn't been updated in a very long time. That's why it is not at the number 2 or number 1 spot for our today's video. And if you have an Snapdragon 870 processor Android device, you are all set to using the Winlator Android. You will get probably the best amount of FPS if you have a rooted device. But unfortunately, Winlator has one single flaw. It doesn't support Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 Android devices yet, but it will support in its newer updates, so it is nothing to worry about. With that being said, let's move on towards the number 2 spot of our today's video, which is going to be DarkOS Windows Emulator Android. DarkOS is a highly customizable Windows emulator for Android with lot of tweaks, lot of theme customization, and it is based on people who like to do more with their Windows emulator for Android. It is even capable of running Steam and Rockstar Games Launcher as far as I know. Not only that, but it can run games bit better than Winlator as well as Mobox emulator. The reason behind it is the fact that DarkOS is regularly updated, whereas Mobox and Winlator don't really receive that many updates, and it takes a lot of time for the developers to curate with the new features, etc. That's why DarkOS emulator is one of the best Windows emulator for Android devices ever created in the year 2024, and I really appreciate this Windows emulator. Though the emulator on the number 1 spot defeats DarkOS emulator in terms of performance, I'll talk more about it later on, but DarkOS emulator has also just added Mali GPU Android devices support. So if you have an Mali GPU Android device or Adreno device, this Windows emulator will be able to run games on your Android devices pretty easily. With that being said, let's move on towards the number 1 spot of our today's video, the top best Windows emulator for Android devices. I'll give you guys 5 seconds. Comment down below which do you think is the number 1 emulator. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so here's my answer. On the number 1 spot, I have placed the Horizon Windows emulator for Android. Horizon is honestly one of the most mind-blowing Windows emulator for Android only in the terms of performance, because the performance that you get in Horizon emulator is unlike DarkOS, Mobox, Winlator. None of these Windows emulator even come close to Horizon emulator in terms of performance. It can literally run GTA 5 at straight up 60 FPS or even greater than 60 FPS on an Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 Android device, and that too with just a single standalone application like Winlator. You don't really need to set up Termux or Termux-X11. You don't need to execute any command. Just add the Horizon emulator on your Android devices, open it, create a brand new Wine container, and yeah, that's about it. You are all set to emulating Windows games on Android. That's the best user experience which we all are looking for in terms of Windows emulation on Android, and the compatibility of games is similar to Mobox as well as Winlator, because all of these Windows emulators are Wine based. That's why you should be able to play games like Pal World, Need for Speed series, One Piece Odyssey, Dragon Ball Z Kakarot and lot more. I can't really name all the PC games, but you get what I'm talking about. You can even emulate games like WWE 2K18, 2K16, 2K17, GTA 5, GTA 4. The list will go on, but the fact is Horizon Emulator will provide you with the best performance compared to any other Windows emulator for Android, but it still does have one flaw, that is overheating. Because it is consuming more CPU resources and GPU resources compared to the other Windows emulator for Android, your device will indeed get lot of heat. So I do recommend you guys to use a smartphone cooler. Other than that, Horizon Emulator is pretty great Windows emulator for Android. Anyways, do let me know in the comment section down below which Windows emulator do you use on a regular basis on your own Android devices. I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe button as I upload similar videos. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.